Well, let me begin with a warning. The Bible passage just read out to us is a beautiful picture of God's love, but I'm not actually going to be talking about that this morning. Today's Mother's Day sermon is not your conventional Mother's Day sermon, and so the story that we're going to be reflecting on, I should warn you, if you're a mother, don't look for parenting techniques in this story. Don't take 100%. It's always a good tip, actually, whenever you read the Bible. Don't always look to directly apply everything that the people in the Bible do. But as Jonathan mentioned, hopefully it's a story that expands our ideas a little bit about what it means to be a mother. Not all mothers are nice and kind, good for hugs, good for cleaning and keeping the household going. Not all mothers like chocolate and flowers and pink things. Sometimes mothers are found in kind of unexpected ways. So a few young adults got me to listen to a podcast, which is kind of like a radio program. They said I need to stop reading books and listen to more podcasts. So they introduced me to a podcast called American Life. It's a very popular podcast. And in one episode, it's reflecting on Mother's Day, and it tells this true story about a girl named Jessica. So Jessica doesn't have good parents. And at the age of 13, she violently breaks into her grandparents' place trying to steal jewelry and cash, and she is arrested. And it's decided that she'll be prosecuted as an adult, so she's found guilty and she's sent to a women's prison. And in the middle of that, these women come and who step up and take on a mothering role for Jessica. One is a young girl in her early 20s. She's a law student, and she makes a commitment to see Jessica every week as a sounding board, as someone for her to chat and to try and help her in her legal case. Another woman is actually a prisoner. Her name is Suzanne, and she sees that Jessica needs someone to act as a mother for her in this place. And this is what she says. Well, I thought I'd start helping her with some schoolwork. We went to the library, and they had kind of a children's section. And Jessica ran over and got a book, The Little Mermaid, and wanted me to read that book to her. And I think it brought out a lot of my maternal instincts, because my son was 13 when I came to prison, and I missed a lot of those times with him. So being able to sit and read with Jessica, it really did both of our hearts good. A few women noticed and cared for Jessica in a place where most people don't care for anyone except themselves. Now, Jessica's story is not perfect. She still ends up a little bit messed up because she basically spends her whole teenage years in a prison. But in a system full of violence and indifference, these women show extraordinary love. They show a mother's love to someone in need. And we know that a mother's love can be a powerful thing, and it often begins by seeing someone in need and responding with love. Now, children, almost by their very definition, are people in need. Like, you see babies, and they are completely helpless. All they can do is express how much they need you by crying and looking cute. Now, some women will get this awesome responsibility and privilege of actually getting to have a life growing inside of them. They make room, like 9 months, it's a pretty long time, of sheltering a life and protecting someone who is vulnerable and allowing that child to grow. Now, in some ways, that sounds romantic, the idea of carrying a child, like wonderful. But my sister is currently pregnant with her third child. And so I've seen, probably too much, that up close and personal, it's like bloody hard work. You have to, if you're trying to be a good mother, you have to take all these things. There's like food you're not supposed to eat. She's constantly going to doctor's appointments and tests. She's actually in the hospital right now because she keeps having labour pains but not going any further than that. So she's constantly in pain. She's tired all the time. She can't bend down. She's got 2 other little children and she can't really help them a lot. And so I think, how difficult is it to be a mother? And I'm not even talking about labour stories. Like, you hear a lot of labour stories and they're like war stories that women go through, and I think I do not need to hear this. But mothers are incredibly tough. Mothers are prepared to give up their bodies sometimes. They're ready to endure discomfort and pain. Often they sacrifice a lot of their own needs for the sake of somebody else. And they do it because they see somebody in need, someone who's vulnerable, and they love. Often it is a thankless task. Often, as a child, you kind of take your mother for granted. You kind of expect that they'll always be doing things for you. And so we thought today, considering it's Mother's Day, it might be good to celebrate women and do it in an unusual way. I want to tell a story of 3 women who kind of act like mothers, but in a way that we might not expect. So, Act 1 is the story of Deborah. Deborah lives in a time when the people of Israel are in need. In Judges 4, it says, again, the Israelites, or literally in the Hebrew it says, the sons of Israel did evil in the eyes of Yahweh. Often God is pictured as being like a parent, a father, and he sets up good boundaries. He sets up commands about how they're to live in the land. He does this not because he wants to make their lives miserable, but because he wants the best. He wants them, like all good parents, he wants the people of Israel to flourish in the land and to have good lives. And so he sets up these boundaries. And the Israelites are like wayward children, like toddlers at their worst. They throw temper tantrums, they stamp their feet and say, I'm not going to do that and you can't make me, and they run away from God and say, I'm getting away from you. They slam the door in God's face. And then God, like most good parents, disciplines them. Okay, that's it. Time out. And in this instance, the Canaanite army comes and conquers some of the northern tribes of Israel. You don't want to live under my command? Well, see what it's like when I'm not there. And the Canaanites start to rule, and the land becomes chaotic. This is a description of what it was like to live at this time. Judges 5, verse 6. In the days of Shemagar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were abandoned. Travellers took to winding paths. Villages in Israel would not fight. It's not safe to travel in Israel, which means it's not safe to trade, which means the economy is suffering. People are scared to go out. They kind of huddle in their villages, draw a little circle around them and hope that that will be safe. The Canaanites are imposing high taxes on any trade that's coming through, so it's making things hard. And there's a sense of lawlessness in the land, so bandits and robbers are on the rise. And the villagers are scared. They can't fight. They think the oppressor is too powerful. The oppressor, we are told, has 900 shiny iron chariots. The Israelites did not have any iron technology. They feel they are outnumbered, and what can they do? All they can do is pray. So they call out to God, God, help us. And of course, Yahweh responds, as he always does. And this is how it's pictured in this instance, Judges 5, verse 4. When you, Yahweh, went out from Seir, when you marched from the land of Edom, the earth shook, the heavens poured, the clouds poured down water. The mountains quaked before Yahweh, the one of Sinai, before Yahweh, the God of Israel. In a land when you're oppressed and your enemy seems powerful, and you call on God for help, what do you expect to happen next? You expect there to be some sort of struggle, right? And that's what's pictured here. God as a warrior marching out towards his people with all his strength and might ready to deliver them. And who do you expect to join him? Well, you'd probably expect men. Men are the warriors, right? They're the tough ones that go out and protect their people while the women stay home looking after the children. That's how it works in a patriarchal culture, and that's how it's worked for most of history until recently. But in this story, God acts in an unexpected and I think a wonderful way. He raises up a woman, Deborah. In Judges 4, Deborah is identified as a prophet. She is someone who speaks words on behalf of God. She's identified as a wife. She's married, but we're never told if she has any biological children or not. She spends most of her days working. She's judging disputes between the people, and she sees that the people are in distress. Deborah sees the people of Israel as her family. She sees that these are people who are in need, they are vulnerable, and they need someone who is going to be tough. They need someone who's going to be ready to lay down some of their own needs in order to help the people. They need a mother. And this is Deborah's response.
Villages in Israel would not fight. They held back until I, Deborah, arose. Until I arose, a mother in Israel.
This is not how we picture a mother. It kind of pushes our idea of what it means to be a mother out. beyond the nuclear family, because Deborah identifies her family not just as her immediate family, but the whole of Israel as her family. And she sees them in distress, and she does what any good mother does. She does whatever she can to protect her family. Kind of like the prisoner story, we see the idea of what it being a mother, being pushed out beyond your biological family. And it isn't easy for Deborah. She's entering into traditional male space, the public sphere, where a lot of women didn't go, in order to protect Israel. I think it's really challenging, particularly for those of us who are mothers, because sometimes the temptation can be, as a mother, is to draw a circle around your family or even just your children, and you spend all your time consumed with them, looking after them, that you never see anything beyond. Now, I understand that especially when children are small, that's kind of just the way it has to be, because they do take up a lot of your time and energy, and you want to give them the best. But sometimes I see mothers who never move on beyond that. Even when their children are capable and independent, they're still just focused in on their little family. This story challenges us. What does it look like to be a mother and extend that love a little bit wider? What would it look like if, as a family, we decided to bless someone beyond our family? Who would you bless? Who would you care for? It's an interesting and thought-provoking question. And we've heard two stories today, and I'm always really amazed and humbled by people who decide to foster and adopt their children into their family. I'm like, wow, that is incredible love. That is love that is wide and deep. I'm always amazed and humbled by those stories, and there are quite a lot of them, of mothers who are dealing with sometimes really hard things in their families, like sick children, which I think is one of the toughest things to deal with as a mother. And yet, even in the middle of that, somehow these mothers have this capacity to love even wider. Let me give you one story. There's a woman named Nancy. You probably haven't heard of her, but if you've been on the internet in the last few years, you might have heard of the ice bucket challenge. It's people pouring, kind of what it sounds like, pouring ice onto their heads and filming it. And a lot of celebrities did it, and they were raising money. It actually began with a mother who had a son who at the age of 27 was diagnosed with ACL, which is a disease that doesn't often happen to younger people. It tends to be more older people. And so in the middle of trying to grapple with her son getting this disease, she somehow found this capacity to want to raise awareness about this disease and want to raise money for research. And so this ice bucket challenge started, and they raised $160 million through this effort. I think, wow, that is love that is wide. In the middle of dealing with something that's really hard in your own family, she was able to extend her love. The Bible paints this picture of a love that is wider and deeper than we might sometimes imagine. I think that's worth noting, particularly today on Mother's Day, because I'm conscious that there are women who can't have children, and there are women who don't have children. I'm not a mother, and there are women who are too young to have children. And sometimes, particularly in Christian circles, you can be made to feel like you have failed as a woman if you haven't had a biological child. And yet, this story reminds us that, hang on, sometimes God might have more for us than we can imagine, that you might actually already be in a mothering role, and you might not call it that, but that's actually what you're doing. That sometimes to be a mother is bigger and more unexpected than we might label it. The crucial question is, who is God calling you to love? It's kind of what Jonathan was talking about last week. We're talking about mission and how God has this incredible heart for the nations. Who is God calling you to love? For some of us, for some women, they will have a love for a particular people group, which means they'll leave their immediate family and go to the other side of the world because they have a love that is beginning to align with God's heart for this world. Deborah identifies herself as a mother for the people of Israel, and she says, this is what God has called me to. This is my purpose. Now, why did God call Deborah? I think partly it's because she has this great capacity to love. Coupled with this capacity to love is this incredible trust in God. She trusts God when very few people do. So Deborah summons Barak. Barak is going to be the army commander, is going to lead this army together. And Barak is a man that you expect should trust God, and yet he seems a little bit hesitant. Listen to his response.
Barak said to her, "If you go with me, I will go, but if you don't go with me, I won't go." "Certainly I will go with you," said Deborah. "But because of the course you are taking, the honour will not be yours, for Yahweh will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman."
Barak is reluctant to fight. Why is he reluctant? We're not sure. Maybe he doesn't feel he's up to the task. He seems to doubt that Yahweh will be able to give them what they need. I mean, Yahweh has been absent for a little while, so maybe he's like, I'm not sure, is God really going to turn up? He says, come on, Deborah, just please be with me. I need you to be with me, and that will reassure me that maybe God is actually going to be here. And it's not just Barak who's reluctant. In Judges 5, there is this lament because they call on all the tribes to come and help them, and a lot of tribes say, no. I don't want to help. It's not really in my territory. I'd much rather stay safe and look after my people. I don't care about my other brothers and sisters. I just want to stay in my tribe. That's our natural inclination, to draw a circle around just the people closest to us. We don't want to put ourselves out. We love only those who love us. We love until it gets difficult, and then we try and extract ourselves out of the situation. Deborah is different. Deborah loves even when it's difficult, and she's prepared to trust God. She's steadfast in her trust. In a time when you could be forgiven for doubting, when the land is incredibly chaotic and you're not sure, is God actually going to deliver us? She trusts, and she's able to sing praises to God like this one.
"Hear this, you kings. Listen, you rulers. I, even I, will sing to Yahweh. I will praise Yahweh, the God of Israel, in song."
Do you trust God? Do you trust God with your heartache and grief? Do you trust God with your hopes and dreams? Do you entrust those you love to God? Because such trust has the power to transform us, to give us the strength to fight one more day for those we love. It gives us the strength to leave our families and go and serve overseas for the sake of the gospel. In the end, only 2 tribes respond to this summons, 2 tiny tribes, you don't hear about them a lot, Zebulun and Naphtali. And they must have seemed pretty puny as they gathered to fight the Canaanite army with their 900 shiny iron chariots. But Deborah's trust is not misplaced. God does turn up and he does deliver them. And we read about it in Judges 5, verse 19. Kings came, they fought, the kings of Canaan fought. At Tanakah by the waters of Medigo, they took no plunder of silver. From the heavens the stars fought, from their courses they fought against Sisera. The river Kishon swept them away, the age-old river, the river Kishon. March on, my soul, be strong. God delivers his people. Firstly, he does it through a storm. A storm comes through the valley, causing the river to flood and sweeping some of the chariots away, but more importantly, just turning the land, which is very common, happens a lot, into mud, so the chariots are useless and cannot work, and this gives the advantage that the Israelite army needs. And then God works through another woman. Act 2. Jael. Now, if you're uncomfortable with the idea of Deborah being a mother, wait till you meet Jael. Now, we're not told, once again, if she has children or not, who knows. What we are told is that she is married and she is not an Israelite. She's a Kenite. So she has some connection to the Israel, but she's not really part of Israel. And it looks like her husband has had a falling out with the other Kenites, so they've kind of moved north. So they're in a precarious situation. We know that the land is already a bit chaotic, and who are they alliance to? Like, who are they with? So it says in Acts 4, the Heber makes an alliance with the Canaanites to try and have some security. The Canaanite army loses the battle. The great commander of their army, Sisera, what does he do? He flees away from the scene and he tries to find a place of safety. And he ends up at Jael's tent. And Jael, she acts almost like a mother to him. Come in. Oh, it must have been so hard. Come into my tent, sit down. Do you want me to wrap you up? She wraps him up in a blanket. How are you going? Is there anything I can get you? Oh, yes, I'm thirsty. I've run a long way. Oh, do you have some water? Oh, I have something better than water. I have milk, warm milk. I mean, this is our image of a mother, isn't it? Tucking us into bed at night, giving us warm milk. It's so soothing, this beautiful maternal image. And then this is what happens next.
Her hand reached for the tent peg, her right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera, she crushed his head, she shattered and pierced his temple. At her feet he sank, he fell, there he lay. At her feet he sank, he fell. Where he sank, there he fell, dead.
Jael kills Sisera in kind of a brutal way, not always our picture of women or mothers. Why does she do it? We're not really told in Judges 4. All we're told is that somehow God is still at work in this. Because if you remember back to the conversation that Deborah had with Barak, and Barak was reluctant to fight, Deborah said, okay, I'll go with you, but the honour of killing Sisera is going to go to a woman. Turns out Jael is that woman. Now, that violence might be problematic for some of us. And you're like, why? Why did she do it? I think we're given a little bit of insight into maybe what motivated her when we meet the third woman in this story. Act 3, Sisera's mother. Now, Sisera's mother is actually the mother of Sisera, so she does have a biological child, her son, out fighting, as we know, and she is waiting for her son to come back. Listen.
Through the window peered Sisera's mother. Behind the lattice she cried out, "Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why is the clatter of his chariots delayed?"
You almost feel sorry for her, don't you? I mean, this is a glimpse into why war is so horrible. It tears families apart, it leaves mothers in mourning. But Sisera's mother is not just waiting for her son to come back.
The wisest of her ladies answer her. Indeed, she keeps saying to herself, "Are they not finding and dividing the spoils, a woman or two for each man? Colourful garments as plunder for Sisera, colourful garments embroidered, highly embroidered garments for my neck. All this as plunder?"
She's waiting for the spoils of war. She is waiting for plunder. And in Hebrew, the language is a lot cruder. In English, we've softened it out a lot. Basically, the word for a woman is a really derogatory term for a woman being used here. And it reminds us that in war, if you lose, women, mothers, they are raped. And we begin to get an insight into what it looks like to live under the Canaanite rule. Particularly if you're a woman, you're in a deeply vulnerable position. And Sisera's mother is kind of pictured as the opposite of Deborah. She's drawn her circle around her family and she doesn't care what happens to anybody else. I mean, she's aware what happens to other women. She's aware that all her wealth is coming through plunder from war, and she doesn't care. She has no compassion for anyone beyond her circle. She thinks no one will notice. I just want my son to come back and he's going to bring back lots of wealth and it's going to be good for my family. It makes you think about what sort of son she's raised, what sort of moral teaching she's raised her son to have. God, in contrast, is a God of justice. And when you think that those who are rich and powerful do things that oppress others and they think no one will notice, the Bible says again and again, God notices and will act. And in this case, he has raised up Deborah and Jael to act. I think one of the reasons why Jael acted as she did was to put an end to Sisera. I mean, he's clearly not the nicest of guys. She puts an end to him so that no other woman will have to suffer. And for those of us who are involved in raising children or involved in kids' lives in any way, it reminds us of the crucial need that we have to teach children and young people to respond with compassion, to teach children and young people to fight and stand up for what is wrong, particularly for those who are most vulnerable. You know, these stories are still happening in our world today. There's still war, there's still women being raped in war, and other women trying to work out how to respond. There's one woman I'd want to share her story. She's a military officer, she was a military officer for the Australian Army, and she served in East Timor. And this is what she says. In 1999, I was very emotional about all the children that had been killed and women who'd been raped and tortured. It was horrific and I was moved by it. But after having children, I really understood what mothers must have felt having their daughters taken away, or the children starving to death. And that's when my PTSD set in. When I had the kids, it triggered a more emotional response to what I'd seen. And that's why I've just got to do something about it now. Tamara Harding did something in response. As well as raising 4 children, she's started up a charity between Australia and a province in Timor. That's love that is wide. These stories I've shared today are not comfortable stories. And I think to be a mother is not comfortable or easy, especially if you're a follower of Jesus. I mean, Jesus said such things like, you can't just love your mother or your father or your children, but you need to love God first. And when you love God, you start to have his heart for the world. And so your circle should start to become bigger. Christians are to be people who look out for the vulnerable and needy, who stand up for justice. And today is a day to celebrate stories that do that push and challenge us to what it looks like to love wider. We need to trust God deeply and love widely. And when we're thinking about mission and how do I fit into God's purpose, one of the best places to start is to think about who is God calling you to love. Because who you love, that's the most important work we can be involved in. Who is God calling you to love? Deborah's song finishes with these words, "But may all who love you, God, be like the sun when it rises in its strength." May people say that about us in the way that we love. Let me pray.